So our next speaker is Harriet Kingaby. She's going to be talking to us about hate speech. She comes from a background of advertising and is currently working with Mozilla on sort of good advertising projects. And that's about as good as I ever get with my introductions, but hopefully Harriet can say a little bit about herself as I... Hello?
Hello. Hi, Louise. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so let me stop sharing and hand over to you.
Brilliant. Hi, everybody. Yes, as Louise says, I am, I work in advertising. I never went to work in advertising. I was supposed to work in climate change and ended up working in advertising slightly because I realized that advertising kind of funds a lot of what we see online and some of the less great stuff, as well as some of the stuff that we really value. So I'm just going to start my presentation and hopefully take you through it. We're calling this one Advertising Hate Speech and the Infodemic. Don't know if you saw that term, but the UN has declared in 2020 that we are living through an infodemic, so a complete pandemic of misinformation. And I would I'm adding hate speech to this today, and I'm going to discuss with you a little bit about how advertising contributes to hate speech online. So I just want to make you a promise at the start of all of this, is that this talk is about the workings of the internet. It's not about showing you horrific examples of hate speech. That's what Twitter's for. And you know, there's enough depressing news out there already, so don't worry. This is going to be a talk about like kind of the inner workings of the internet and not some really disgusting stuff. Today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how digital advertising works, so you kind of understand how it kind of funds the pipes essentially, and how advertising accidentally funds hate speech and disinformation. And then I never believe in creating fear without giving people a little bit of agency. So I'm going to just kind of wrap up with a couple of things that you can do if you see this stuff online, just to help, because I think it's something that we all see every day, or at least we've all probably been aware of the debates around, particularly given the news agenda last week. So we've got some juicy stuff to talk about. There's one piece of key information that I think you should know before we start off, and that is that advertising it essentially funds the internet. And, you know, that's everything from the cat videos that, you know, kind of probably made you giggle this morning when you got up and looked at the news again and needed a bit of light relief, right through to kind of hard news and, you know, kind of great reporting, or that, you know, kind of whenever you kind of log on to kind of websites to read the news, your apps that you might use for, I don't know, a flashlight on your phone or whatever that is. A lot of that is, you know, if you see an ad there, then advertising is actually paying for that free service. And Mark Zuckerberg very famously stood up in front of the US Congress, and when asked how he made money, he said, "Senator, we serve ads." So that's if you take away nothing else, I want you to take away that advertising is essentially the kind of the business model for the internet and many of the digital services and the apps that you use. Next important thing to know is that hate speech, I'm not just defining hate speech as an opinion I disagree with. I might be just about millennial, but I promise you I'm not a snowflake. This is actually the UN's definition of hate speech, and you know, I will trust what they say on this. So it's speech that incites violence or discrimination towards a particular group. The glorious leader of the United States, I think, gave us a very good example of this when Twitter took action against him for saying when the looting starts, the shooting starts, because he was essentially inciting violence towards a group of protesters with that speech. Things like dehumanizing language. So that might be referring to groups of people as rats or cockroaches, and you know, arguably, we see the British press kind of labeling, consistently labeling kind of refugees as migrants. And the idea from that, you know, when you start doing that, you start to kind of dehumanize them and make hate towards them seem more acceptable. Negative misinformation. So, for example, when newspapers focus on crimes committed by a particular group, That might be, Muslim grooming gangs, for example, who are kind of repeatedly shown in the press over kind of other groups. Overwhelmingly negative stories around a particular group, or unnecessary references to race, religion, or gender. So, if you're implying that actually because someone is from a particular group or a particular sexual orientation is the reason they might have done something bad, that could be an example. So of all of these, dehumanizing language is the easiest to draw a line around and the easiest to say that's definitely happening. All of the others, obviously, there are some grey areas, and that's partially what makes this problem so difficult to police, and so difficult to kind of, to draw really strong lines around. So, advertising funds the internet. I'm not just going to share with you stuff that I don't agree with. I'm going to hopefully share with you something kind of based in kind of the ideas of cleverer people than me. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually kind of help you understand how digital advertising works, because I think this is really important knowledge to kind of understand where this process might be going wrong. So what used to happen is advertising was something that we all saw. It was targeted at a mass audience. It might be, kind of on a billboard on your way into work. So, this one, people knew that they could get commuters as they journeyed into the city centre. It might have been on a television show. So, for example, Cadbury's with their long-running sponsorship of Coronation Street, for example. So you could take a guess then, rather than it just being at mass audience, you think, okay, people that watch Coronation Street are more likely to be this age, they're more likely to be, kind of this gender, etc. So you could kind of start to get more targeted. But essentially, we didn't know much about the people that saw this. We could take broad kind of brush ideas of who they were, and everyone saw the same thing. If you turned into Coronation Street, you saw the same advert as anyone else who did. But that has all changed with the advent of smartphones and, kind of like second screening, we would call this, well, actually third screening, where actually we started to have personal devices. So what that meant was that actually I could, as an advertiser, I could start to target individual people on the web. So we've gone from mass advertising to advertisers actually having quite a lot of information about who I am or who you are, and being able to serve ads that are tailored to you. And this whole process, it used to be dominated by humans. Like, so if I wanted to place my advertising on the billboard on the way into the centre of Bristol, I would probably get my ad delivered, kind of made up. I would then get on the phone to the owner of the billboard and I would say, I'd like this billboard for 6 weeks, please. And then humans would go and put that advertising up. Obviously, if we're talking about making this really granular and tailored to each individual person, it's got to be done by algorithms. And we all know, kind of like when you start to kind of hand over responsibility from humans to algorithms, that mistakes and unforeseen consequences can creep in. And this is kind of the situation that we're in. So essentially, this whole process behind the scenes looks like an eBay auction every time that you go onto a new website, or every time you load, if you click into an app that's got advertising in it. And what is happening behind the scenes is there are a load of advertisers saying, right, I want to get in front of a woman in her mid-30s who loves cats. And as my page is loading, that auction's going on, and then the winner, I will see their advertising. And this process has got some benefits for us. It means that we're not going to be seeing, hopefully that's the promise, we're not going to be continuously seeing products that have no bearing on our lives, that we don't want to buy or we don't want to see. In reality, we know, as everyone who's been chased around the internet by the Christmas present that they've bought their partner, or or their mum who uses the same computer, will know this isn't always the case. But that is the idea behind it all. And like I said, sometimes this goes wrong. This isn't a perfect process. When we hand things over to algorithms, sometimes the kind of unforeseen consequences kind of creep into the mix. So the funding of disinformation is a pretty big problem, and extremist information. In fact, the Global Disinformation Index thinks that it probably, kind of extremist sites and disinformation websites probably make around $235 million a year. And to put this into context, the whole digital advertising budget globally last year was $330 billion. So although this is a pretty big number, it's not quite as big. It's quite a small kind of slice of the digital advertising pie, which means it perhaps doesn't get treated as seriously as as it could do. And this is a real problem, because what's happening is terrorist groups or kind of hate preachers essentially have a business model. They can make money by kind of putting content out there and kind of monetizing it through advertising. And on the disinformation front, the most famous example of this was something called Pizzagate. I don't know whether you've heard of this, but this was a group of Macedonian teenagers who made an absolute fortune off of creating fake news around Hillary Clinton in the run-up to the 2016 US elections. So what they would do is they would create a website and they would write ever more kind of ridiculous stories about Hillary Clinton. And then they would have advertising on their website, and they would get that shared into kind of particular Facebook groups or, kind of tweeted or whatever. It would get disseminated. And because it was so ridiculous, it flew. And they were making tens of thousands of kind of dollars a week, when your average salary in Macedonia, I think, is much, much lower. And that actually culminated in the conspiracy theory that kind of Hillary Clinton is running a paedophile ring out of the basement of a pizza restaurant in Washington, DC. And one gentleman was so convinced of this that he walked in there with a gun to try and free the children, and was kind of put in prison. So you can see that this stuff has really serious consequences, as ridiculous as it might sound. It works very, very well online, and advertising is helping it out. So let me break that down. How does hate spread online? So, for example, for some examples, you could have a kind of these Macedonian teenagers producing producing lies and kind of misleading articles. You could have someone like you could have a hate preacher, kind of like Tommy Robinson, for example, producing hateful content, and you could have ads running on their site next to that content. And if you're viewing the ad, if I as a viewer am viewing that ad, or if I click it, then the person that owns that website is making money. So that's the first way. But usually that's not enough. We don't go and look for websites that much when we go online. Usually we go straight to our favorite sites. I'm a Twitter user. You might be a Facebook user or something else. So usually you've actually got to get your content to where the people are. Now that means that you've then got to make sure that people on these platforms are sharing your content. And so what a lot of these kind of Macedonian teenagers were doing was using pro-Trump Facebook groups and posting their articles in there, and then then people were engaging with it and it was spreading. Another way that this can happen is if I'm a YouTube creator and I'm sharing some pretty gross stuff, and it's usually what happens is the content on YouTube is the content online is so reactionary, and people react to it so much that the recommendation algorithms on the platforms think, I know that's got to be really good because lots of people are interacting with it, so I'll start to recommend it to more people. And as those recommendation algorithms recommend things to more people, it keeps getting recommended again and again and again. And actually this hate spreads in a cycle again. There we go, recommendation algorithms. So 3 ways that kind of hate spreads online. And this is just an example. So there's a Twitter account which is posting links to the top performing US Facebook pages over a 24-hour period, and they are pretty depressingly usually quite alt-right. You've got kind of Fox News, who's well known for commentators like Tucker Carlson, his orangeness, as we know, the Blue Lives Matter movement, and kind of various kind of alt-right kind of commentators there. So we can see that on some of these platforms, the alt-right in particular is doing extremely well. And you may have seen today, Kim Kardashian has actually pulled all of her she stopped using Facebook and Instagram for a day. Businesses did this last month. There was a movement to pull all advertising spend from kind of Facebook and Instagram for a month. And like over 1,000 companies signed it, from Unilever to Coca-Cola. And they were saying to Facebook, look, you've got to do something about your hate speech problem. Otherwise, we're not going to come back. And obviously they are coming back. And obviously Facebook, performs a very, kind of niche kind of service. So it's quite difficult to leave it. But, there was enough of a problem that we've got celebrities and huge brands who aren't known for their bravery when it necessarily comes to standing up for big issues, taking a stand. And this, we've known about this for years, is what I would take away from all of this. And this was a Times investigation, very famous, from February kind of 2017. You've got holiday sandals appearing next to some pretty nasty kind of terrorist content online. So this problem, we've known about it for a long time, and there's a lot of noise, but things are still slipping through the net. We see it in Brazil. YouTube is accused of radicalizing Brazil. This was a kind of an interview with a load of kind of content creators who claim that the recommendation algorithms really got them into the kind of the alt-right ideologies, and that and that they actually were kind of made more right-wing as a result of being on these platforms. And I know what some of you might be thinking, particularly when I brought up Stop Hate for Profit, and that is, well, look, we have rights, and we have a right to free speech. We can say what we like within the laws of the land, and I would agree with you. I don't agree. There's a great quote, isn't there, that I may not agree with what you say, but I'll fight for your right to say it. But there's a big issue here, and there's a big difference, in my opinion, between being able to
I think you've frozen, Harriet, or is that just for me?
To say what you like, and kind of speech. And see me now, or hear me now?
Yep, all good.
Great. Sorry. So yeah. So I would differentiate between the right to free speech, which is the right to say, kind of what you like within the laws of the land, and the right to free speech. So the right to get paid for that speech. And we're seeing, we saw a huge debate, for example, last week. This was from the kind of spat between Andrew Neil of The Spectator and the Co-op, when the Co-op said that they were going to pull their advertising from The Spectator because it had been kind of inciting hatred against trans people. It's been accused in the past of inciting hatred against Muslim people by suggesting that they shouldn't have the right to vote. And Andrew's kind of argument was very much, you should not, was very much like advertisers should not dictate editorial policy, which is something I agree with. But if your publication is spreading hate speech, then there's no obligation for those advertisers to fund that hate speech either. So we can always talk about that in the questions if you want to go into that a bit further. So what can we do? As I said, I don't agree with kind of creating fear without agency. So there's like little things you can do. If you do see an advertiser against a piece of content which is just not right, and remember our little UN checklist, you can tweet people like Stop Funding Hate or Sleeping Giants, depending on the country you're in, and say, and tweet that organisation as well, and say, do you really want your advertising to be appearing next to this and funding it? You can report it to the platforms. Obviously, that takes a little bit longer. And if you're an advertiser, I kind of co-founded something called the Conscious Advertising Network, and we encourage advertisers to stop this from happening in the first place. So to check whether advertising is going, and you know, kind of make sure that they're not funding really nasty stuff online. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. I think questions were slow in the WhatsApp. I think people were listening, and it's not your normal sort of jocular nerd night presentation, but they're starting to come through now. A few questions from me just while Susie's having a read through the chat. It was super interesting, and thank you very much. Yeah, so you said at the beginning, I think it was at 235 million estimated on to have been spent. How much of that, no, and you said 300 billion is spent on advertising in total. How much of that is to Facebook? How much of the total advert share of the market do they have?
That's a really good question. So between Facebook and Google, they mop up 70% of the ad spend. So that's 70% of that 330 billion. So if you're thinking about like, you know, if you're thinking about how much profit they're making potentially from that, it's you know, it's a huge amount of money. And so, you know, it's a big problem basically that that they should be doing something about, and they should have the resources to do something about.
And in that the Conscious Consumer or whatever the campaign, sorry, say what the name of it again?
Oh, Conscious Advertising Network.
Conscious Advertising Network. So how much influence can you have over the algorithms? If it's an algorithm dictating where your ad's going to appear, like I don't suppose that every single website is categorized to what sort of content it's providing. So how on earth can you, as an advertising buyer, kind of have any control over where your ads appear?
Yeah, so basically a lot of it is that people kind of went, oh, it's new technology, like we'll just give all our money to, you know, kind of like purveyors of this new technology, and you know, we'll believe the numbers that they tell us, and that's great. But so what we try and ask people to take a bit to get involved again, because basically when you cut human beings out and you're funding all this money into a big black box, and then the computers kind of essentially gaming the system. So advertisers will kind of like funnel a lot of money into this box and say, okay, we want this to reach like, I don't know, 1 million people. And so the algorithm will be like, okay, we'll get it on sites that mean 1 million people will see it. But then you've got lots of people creating fake sites and fake traffic. They think that half the traffic on the internet is supposed to be fake in order to make money off of this system. So actually, if you're a Macedonian teenager sitting in you know, kind of in your front room, you can make a load of money out of this quite happily, and people aren't really checking, or haven't been checking as much as they should. And
final question from me before I hand over to Susie and the audience who've paid tickets to be able to ask questions. Like, to what extent can I just break the system by giving them false information about me when I log onto websites and register for apps and stuff? Like, I don't generally, because I'm worried that I'll never remember what fake date of birth I gave, but can we just sort of disengage from it in that way?
It's really, the problem with all of this system is it's so difficult to disengage with. So like, it's, as you search the internet, little packets of data, little things called tracking cookies are being put into your browser so they can track what you do and then feed it all back. So the best thing you can do is use like browsers. Safari is a good one, Firefox is a good one, DuckDuckGo, that actually stop them organizations from tracking you. And yeah, definitely use a fake name when you sign up to stuff, because sometimes you don't know what you're signing yourself up to, because T's and C's can be about this long.
Never read of terms and conditions in my life. Right, Susie, over to you.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Harriet. That was fascinating stuff and terrifying. So this is another sort of Facebook question. So Facebook tends to get a lot of the bulk of the blame for this kind of stuff, but is Google getting away with too much here, do you think?
Yes. I mean, Facebook's getting a lot of heat at the moment, because, you know, kind of rightfully people are going, this isn't okay. And also because we we really, we really love our Facebook products. We really love Instagram. We really love, Messenger, and it keeps us connected. Whereas Google, I think, it's not so obvious how it's all working. And I think that actually that works in their advantage, and that people they don't get activated in quite the same way. So I think with Google, it's more about like, there's examples of people being radicalized through Facebook, through Google, YouTube algorithms. There's a massive problem there. And I think, they are working on it. But definitely the pressure on them will come at some point.
Yeah, they will get their day. So what extent do you think governments want to crack down on advertising, if at all? And what are they doing kind of to crack down on the sort of Muslim terrorist versus the alt-right terrorist?
That's a really good question. Oh my goodness. Governments, the EU wants to, I think, crack down on advertisers. Like there's I know, everyone went through the pain of GDPR training and all of that stuff a couple of years ago. It was last year, wasn't it? Gosh. Like everyone went through the GDPR stuff, and that was the EU's attempt to kind of go, no, no, you can't just kind of get people's data for any for any reason that you so desire it for. And so that was their start, and then there's new consultations going out. So I think definitely in the EU, that's a big issue. What we'll do after Brexit, I don't know, but I think the way that the EU does their legislation is to kind of make sure that if you're doing anything with a European citizen, you have to obey EU rules. And what was the end of the question was oh gosh, yeah. I think we have to be really careful about narratives and frames in this, like just not to get too down about things, but we've got some really nasty national narratives going on. I was born in the 80s to a single mum, and I know that in the 80s and 90s everything was supposed to be single mums' faults, and now it's supposed to be kind of migrants' faults, and we have these really nasty national narratives that happen. And I think we have to be super careful when we've got a government that likes to place blame and likes to think about things about just critically analysing this stuff. But
it's very depressing. So thinking about the boycotts you're talking about, so some people have said that it's partly because companies actually wanted to minimize ad spend during COVID rather than actually having a sort of moral stance. So what's your sort of thoughts on that?
They didn't have to join a boycott to do that. If you look at like particularly in travel magazines and things like that, if you look at ad spend, it just went in March. So like lots of advertisers pulled their ad spend from lots of different places. So my answer is they wouldn't have had, and actually there was one point where like loads of national newspapers were kind of going, we've got no money coming in, and we've got the biggest news stories of like a generation we're trying to report on, help us. My response is it's for honestly trying to get brands to take a stand on anything is takes a lot of work and can be quite painful. So it's got bad enough. If it's got bad enough for Coca-Cola to be saying, let's not do this, it's got pretty bad.
Coke taking the moral stance is a worrying sign. Then do you think boycotts actually works? Do you think that's one of the solutions?
I don't know that it's not brought Facebook to its knees, would be my response. But what it has done is kind of get people thinking and start a conversation. And I think there was a lot of people going, don't just think about your Facebook spend, think about the whole lot, because the whole lot is probably funding something not very nice. Or at least a portion of it is not funding something, is funding stuff that's not very nice. So I think it's definitely started people thinking, oh right, actually what am I doing, and kind of taking action like that. So I think fine, it's it's not going to reform Facebook in a week, but or in a month even, but what it will do is start that process of change, which I think is more interesting.
Right. So somebody's asked, what's going to happen to all this once we install ad blockers on parents' computers?
Do it. I think it's something there's some horrific statistic. If you're an advertiser, like 48% of 18 to 34s have got an ad blocker installed. Which, you know, given if you work in advertising, like everyone is obsessed with like that age group. So I was a bit like, interesting. Yeah, do install ad blockers on your parent's computer, but just be aware that if you do that, then it does mean that that money is not going to the good stuff. So when your parents are, you know, kind of visiting their newspaper of choice, for example, that newspaper is not getting any money. And if you're going on a content creator that they really like and want to support, that content creator is not getting any money because of the ad blocker. So, you know, if you're going to do that, fine, but do, you know, perhaps give them a subscription to that news outlet that they really like as well, so that you're kind of balancing it.
Yeah, cool. So question here saying, can you tell us more about climate change in advertising? So what advertising skills should climate folk know about?
Oh, nice one. So there's some good ones. So climate change in advertising, there's a few new formats that are popping up that give a donation to charity when users watch an ad. So there's something called Good Loop, and there's an organization called Give With. So if you're a climate change organization, you can look at things like that. There's some really good stuff like that came out of the Facebook boycott, where like advertisers were thinking about independent publications and how they can get, you know, they can make sure that the diverse independent publications are getting ad money as well. And so, you know, I think there's, I can't remember the name of them. There's an ad network that's specifically for kind of like green publications. And there's one called Brand Advance that does like, that kind of tries to get advertising money to kind of diverse kind of publishers from the LGBTQ community and things like that. And then advertising's got a massive environmental impact, because, you know, anything that's kind of slowing down the web or, you know, kind of creating more data processing means that it's got a bigger carbon footprint. So you can look at kind of lighter ad formats that are a bit more environmentally friendly. And there's an organization called Manifest, and they're that, you know, one of their big things is around like, how can you create better, greener, and whole grain digital, how can you create better, greener web design and adverts and things like that. So you can look at it from that angle as well.
Wow, cool, thanks. So this is going to be the last question. So hopefully it's a good one. No, it is a good one, I know. So is there a danger that if certain demographics opt out of targeted advertising, they lose their influence on the algorithms, and that'll have a knock-on loss of influence when governments are looking at data online?
Ooh, good question.
Quite complicated, but a good one.
Yeah, I mean, my first thought would be, there's just no way of opting out unless you are a mad kind of like tech wizard, amazing, like, I don't know, amazing person. It's just so difficult to opt out of all of this kind of tracking and targeting. I would suggest that actually it would be so difficult for it, you know, it's not impossible for a group to influence recommendations or anything like that. So without coordination, like I think, you know, kind of the K-pop stars have influenced kind of Twitter recommendation algorithms and things like that, but that was because it was super coordinated. So I think actually what's more likely to happen is if the data doesn't exist for that group, which I suppose is what they're driving at, but then I think there is, you know, there are moves to create data about particular groups which are really interesting. So like the Unmistakable create data about British Indians, British Bangladeshis, South Asians, etc. They do surveys, they do all sorts of stuff because a lot of this data doesn't always exist. So I think, I don't know if that's a good answer to that question, but I think,
yeah,
you know.
I think so. That sounds good to me. Okay, great. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.